Good evening. I know that at least one person here has never been to a poetry reading before, and in honor of another friend of mine who works in the School of Dentistry, I will try to make the reading a painless, procedure. And some of you have heard me talk several times already this week, and I shall endeavor not to repeat myself. Poetry is an art which I don't think is terribly well understood in our culture. It's almost like a ritual practice, like hanging mistletoe, that we still do, but we're not entirely sure why we do it. Poetry is still used in school, and people don't entirely want to cut it out, even though they don't necessarily see the purposes of it, out of the same kind of superstition, like somehow maybe something bad will happen if we take the last few remnants out of school. And what poetry seems to me is something that originates, and we know this historically, we know this anthropologically, as far back in human culture as we can possibly get. It comes from a time before there's writing, before there's any of the disciplines we have, when song, dance, poetry is one activity, and it's the arts that you make with the human body, in a sense, to articulate what it is to be human. It's a way of remembering, to use Robert Frost's definition, what it would impoverish us to forget. In some sense, the powers of articulating human existence. I think that's what Emerson's talking about when he says the world, it seems, is always waiting for a poem, which is to say that we go through life experiencing things somewhat differently from the way everyone else has ever experienced them. I mean, even if we have a kind of family resemblance with other people in humanity, the particularity of our time, our moment, our personage needs somehow to be recognized. And what the poem does, in a sense, what new poetry does, is to somehow give us the confirmation of having our experience recognized and articulated. This is just for there. I'm talking with the voice God gave me, so if you can't hear, move closer. There are seats. So in fact, I prefer to speak without technological intermediation, though this fellow demands that I be mic'd, which is always a dangerous thing for a Sicilian. And I also want to make him work by walking around a little. Now, in a personal sense, poetry, for me, people are always asking, well, how do you write poems? As if I know. Because it's to a certain degree one does it on instinct. But poems for me tend to emerge in one of two ways. The first is very easy to explain. Life gives you an experience that has a kind of shape, and simply writing it down and trying to capture it with the vividness that it had in the actual experience. And you can explain that. Those poems really happen. The other kind is where the poem sort of emerges as an impulse that you don't quite sure you know where it's going when you begin. So let me give you the first kind, which is fairly easy. Shortly after my wife and I got married, we came home to our apartment, and there was a bouquet of flowers waiting for us on the doorstep. It was not addressed to anyone, and it was signed only with a first name. Unfortunately, it was a first name like Dana, or Chris, or Kim, a name of ambiguous gender. And I claimed I didn't know anybody like this that would have sent me those flowers, and she said that she didn't know anybody with that name who would have sent her flowers. So we brought the bouquet in, we put it on the kitchen table, and it sat there sowing dissent. And I wrote this poem, which is also a little bit of a kind of quiet homage to my former teacher, Elizabeth Bishop. It's called Thanks for Remembering Us. The flowers, sent here by mistake, signed with a name that no one knew, are turning bad. What shall we do? Our neighbor says they're not for her, and no one has a birthday near. We should thank someone for the blunder. Is one of us having an affair? At first we laugh, and then we wonder. The iris was the first to die, enshrouded in its sickly, sweet, and lingering perfume. The roses fell one petal at a time, and now the ferns are turning dry. The room smells like a funeral, but there they sit, too much at home, accusing us of some small crime, like love forgotten. And we can't throw out a gift we've never owned. And let me read you a different kind of poem, which is to say that an image gets in your mind, a kind of cadence of language. I mean, you know what this is like. I mean, you're a poet. And you start to work with it, and the poem that emerges is often something that you can't account for. This poem, in a literal sense, describes a veteran's funeral in a veteran cemetery. If you've ever been to one where they have the uniform crosses, and usually on Memorial Day, the VFW or American Legion will put little flags in front of the graves, and then they simply rot away, the rest of the year. And this is a veteran cemetery at dusk in the autumn. It's called Veteran Cemetery. The ceremonies of the day have ceased, abandoned to the ragged crow's parade. The flags unravel and the caterpillars feast. The wreaths collapse unto the stones they shade. How quietly doves gather by the gate, like souls who have no heaven and no hell. The patient grass reclaims its lost estate, where one stone angel stands as sentinel. The voices whispering in the burning leaves, faint and inhuman, what can they desire when every season feeds upon the past and summer's green ignites the autumn's fire? The afternoon's a single thread of light, sewn through the tatters of a leafless willow, as one by one the branches fade from sight and time curls up like paper turning yellow. I was born and raised in California, where I've recently returned to. I've spent about half my life in California, half elsewhere. And it's a very odd thing for a poet an English language poet, at least, growing up in California, is that if you are trained in the literature of England and New England, which is the canonic poetry of the English language, the seasons they describe have no reality in California. There's no snow in the winter. It's not green and lush in the summer. And so you have this odd sense. And I have to say, I was very shocked when I first moved to Boston that I really thought that the seasons described in English poetry were like the fairies and the nights. It was a poetic construction, and I realized that Robert Frost was actually describing a literal, natural reality. And so I've written a number of poems which, in a sense, try to describe how the West seems to a native. And this is one which, when I wrote, I didn't think that anybody really would even understand, except for maybe a couple Californians. Ironically, it's become my most widely reprinted and widely translated poem. It's been translated into every language that has no rain in the native country. All the dry countries. What it does is it describes the California landscape the way an Easterner would see it, and at the very end suggests how a native sees it. It's all one complicated, endless sentence, but when it was published in the New Yorker, the editors judiciously placed a period at the end of each stanza, giving it an elegance and symmetry not entirely in the original. California hills in August. I can imagine someone who found these fields unbearable, who climbed the hillside in the heat, cursing the dust, cracking the brittle weeds underfoot, wishing a few more trees for shade. An Easterner especially, who would scorn the meagerness of summer, the dry, twisted shapes of black elm, scrub oak, and chaparral, a landscape August had already drained of green. One who would hurry over the clinging thistle, foxtail, golden poppy, knowing everything was just a weed, unable to conceive that these trees and sparse brown bushes were alive, and hate the bright stillness of the noon, without wind, without motion, the only other living thing a hawk, hungry for prey, suspended in the blinding sunlit blue. And yet, how gentle it seems to someone raised in a landscape short of rain, the skyline of a hill, broken by no more trees than one can count, the grass, the empty sky, the wish for water. Let's see what I have here. I want now. I've talked about poems that are, in a sense, are generated, out of something you don't quite understand or an impulse you don't quite know where it's going. I think it's a very important moment in every poetry reading, where the poet reads you a poem you will not understand. That moment has come. Relax, lean back. This is a poem called The Litany. And if it works associationally. And if you know a litany in Roman Catholic liturgy is, in a sense, a list of the names or attributes of a sacred thing, where you often don't name the thing itself. The litany. This is a litany of lost things. A canon of possessions dispossessed, a photograph, an old address, a key. It is a list of words to memorize and to forget, of amo, amos, amat, the conjugations of a dead tongue in which the final sentence has been spoken. This is a liturgy of rain, falling on mountain, field, and ocean, indifferent, anonymous, complete, of water infinitesimally slow, sifting through rock, pooling in darkness, gathering in springs, and rising again without our agency, only to dissolve in mist or cloud or dew. This is a prayer to unbelief, to candles guttering in darkness undivided, to incense drifting through emptiness. It is the smile of a stone Madonna and the silent fury of the consecrated wine, a benediction on the death of a young God, brave and beautiful, dying on a tree. This is a litany of earth and ashes, to the dust of roads and vacant rooms, to the fine silt circling in a cloud of shaft of sun, settling indifferently on books and bed. This is a prayer to praise what we become. Dust thou art, to dust shalt thou return. Savor its taste, the bitterness of dust and ashes. This is a prayer inchoate and unfinished for you, my love, my loss, my lesion, a rosary of words to count out time's illusions, all the minutes, hours, and days the calendar compounds, as if the past existed somewhere like an inheritance still waiting to be claimed, until at last it is our litany, mon vieux, my reader, my voyeur, as if the mist steaming from the gorge, this pure paradox, the shattered river rising as it falls, splintering the light, swirling it skyward, neither transparent nor opaque, but luminous, even as it vanishes, were not our life. And now I want to read a poem sort of about the same subject, but this is a poem that really happened. This refers to a Sicilian custom. When your first child is born, you save the umbilical cord, you wrap it in the roots of a tree, and you plant it. I think the folk symbol of this of this custom is pretty obvious. It's a way of linking yourself to the very land that feeds you. And it's usually you plant an olive tree or fig tree. In this case, the tree that's being planted is a California redwood. And the you in the poem, the thing that the poem is addressed to, is that redwood tree. I wrote, this poem takes place in, when my parents finally left Los Angeles. They bought an old chicken farm in Northern California. This is basically in their orchard. I wrote this poem shortly after the death of my first son, who died at 4 months of sudden infant death syndrome. Planting a sequoia. All afternoon, my brothers and I have worked in the orchard, digging this hole, laying you into it, carefully packing the soil. Rain blackened the horizon, but cold winds kept it over the Pacific, and the sky above us stayed the dull gray of an old year coming to an end. In Sicily, a father plants a tree to celebrate his first son's birth, an olive or a fig tree, a sign that the earth has one more life to bear. I would have done the same, proudly laying new stock into my father's orchard, a green sapling rising among the twisted apple boughs, a promise of new fruit in other autumns. But today, we kneel in the cold planting you, our native giant, defying the practical custom of our fathers, wrapping in its roots a lock of hair, a piece of an infant's birth cord, all that remains above earth of a newborn son, a few stray atoms brought back to the elements. We will give you what we can, our labor and our soil, water drawn from the earth when the skies fail, nights softened by the ocean fog, days softened by the circuit of bees. We plant you in the corner of the grove, bathed in western light, a slender shoot against the sunset. And when our family is no more, all of his unborn brothers dead, every niece and nephew scattered, the house torn down, his mother's beauty, ashes in the air, I want you to stand among strangers, all young and ephemeral to you, silently keeping the secret of your birth. One more grim poem. This is a poem I wrote. I don't really like to read it. It's not a request. My son ordered me to read this, and he's, and so I'm, he may be right, but it's all I can say is this poem is very strange, and it's all true. It takes place in a children's neurological ward, where unfortunately, we spent a lot of time. And the thing is that my son was injured and had to go there, but we were surrounded essentially where everybody but him pretty much was dying, and their parents. And I tried to write about this. It took me about 15, 16 years to finish the poem, because I couldn't, I had to write about it truthfully, and I had to let it go where it wanted to go, and I didn't want to go along. It's in 3 parts. It's called Special Treatments Ward. Each part is shorter than the one before. Special Treatments Ward, which it's a euphemism, So this is where the children come to die. Hidden on the hospital's highest floor, they wear their bandages like uniforms and pull their IV rigs along the hall with slow and careful steps, or bald and pale, they lie in bright pajamas on their beds, watching another world on a screen. Their mothers spend their nights inside the ward, sleeping on chairs that fold out into beds, too small to lie in comfort. Soon they slip beside their children as if they might mesh those small, bruised bodies back into their flesh. Instinctively, they feel that love so strong protects a child. Each morning proves them wrong. No one chooses to be here. We play the parts we are given. Horrible as they are, we try to play them well, whatever that means. We need to talk, though talking breaks our hearts. The doctors come and go like oracles, their manner cool, omniscient, and oblique. There is a word that no one ever speaks. 2. I put this poem aside 12 years ago because I could not bear remembering the faces it evoked, and every line still seems so inadequate and grim. What right had I, whose son had walked away, to speak for those who died? And I'll admit I wanted to forget. I'd lost one child and couldn't bear to watch another die. Not just the silent boy who shared our room, but even those bird-thin figures dimly glimpsed, shuffling deliberately, disjointedly, like ancient soldiers after a parade. Whatever strength the task required, I lacked. No well-stitched words could suture shut these wounds, and so I stopped. But there are poems we do not choose to write. 3. The children visit me, not just in dreams, appearing suddenly, silently, insistent, unprovoked, unwelcome. They've taken off their milky bandages to show the raw red lesions they still bear. Risen, they are healed, but not made whole. A few I recognize, untouched by years. I cannot name them. Their faces pale and gray, like ashes fallen from a distant fire. What use am I to them? Almost a stranger. I cannot wake them from their satin beds. Why do they seek me? They never speak, and vagrant sorrow cannot bless the dead. So, let's change the mood. You can already see one of the things I really liked, and I still like, is the noises you make when you put words together. It seems to me that what poetry consists of is creating a verbal enchantment which changes the posture of our attention. It makes us lean into the poem and sort of lower some of our defenses. And most important, and this is what took me years to understand as a poet, the poet leaves a little something out so that the reader can bring that from their life. And a poem is, in that sense, collaborative. But it all depends upon creating the enchantment. And I absolutely loved the high romantic music of the English canon. I mean, think of a poet like Tennyson saying, "Come into the garden, Maud, for the black bat night has flown. Come into the garden, Maud, I am here at the gate alone, and the spice of the woodbine is wafted aloft, and the musk of the rose is blown." I mean, wow. I mean, isn't this just good stuff? I mean, it's like, when I read this in high school, I was just in rapture. And I always wanted to write in the high romantic vein. The trouble is, when you're born, in working class LA, you get crappy jobs, you work in an office, you don't have many occasions to write in the high romantic vein. But some years ago, I came across a tragic love affair, and I felt that had Lord Tennyson been living at this hour, he would have commemorated it. A friend of mine had a superannuated orange tabby cat named Fred. And she decided to brighten up his twilight years by bringing him home a child bride. But it was a very unusual May-December marriage because it was too late in December for Fred to reciprocate. So every month the younger cat went into heat, chased Fred around the house and garden, and nothing ever happened. So I wrote the cat this poem. Come into the garden, Fred, for the neighborhood tabby is gone. Come into the garden, Fred. I have nothing but my flea collar on, and the scent of the catnip has gone to my head. I'll wait by the screen door till dawn. The fireflies court in the sweet gum tree. A nightjar calls from the pine, and she seems to say in her rhapsody, "Oh, mustard brown Fred, be mine." And the full moon sets my whiskers afire, and the fur goes erect on my spine. I hear the frogs in the muddy lake croaking from shore to shore. They've one swift season to soothe their ache. In autumn they sing no more. So ignore me now, or you'll hear my meow as I scratch all night by the door. My kid brother claims that's written about him, but it isn't. It isn't. Easy mistake to make, I think. Another thing I've been, I have worked, I've collaborated with probably at this point about 40 composers, musicians, and everything from rock and jazz, mostly classical, vocal music, and I find it exciting, but also in an imaginative sense, extraordinarily useful. If you go back a couple hundred years, poets were writing epics, they were writing histories, they were writing hymns, they were writing topical ballads, they were writing all kinds of poems. Now they basically write short lyric utterances that for the most part can appear on one typed page, and on occasion they'll let loose in a big culture epic. And it seems to me that when you work in a different genre, when you work in a different mode, it actually brings out different things in your imagination. And so I thought I would read, two things that were written with music in mind. The first is I'm working on a cycle of jazz songs with a wonderful jazz pianist named Helen Sung. And I just wanted to sort of see if I could do something that was, I thought, a transparent, a kind of contemporary, but very tight poem. It's going to end up be really just mostly to annoy the critics. I've made it the title poem of my next book. It's called Pity the Beautiful. Pity the beautiful, the dolls and the dishes, the babes with big daddies granting their wishes. Pity the pretty boys, the hunks and Apollos, the golden lads whom success always follows, the hotties, the knockouts, the 10s out of 10, the drop-dead gorgeous, the great leading men. Pity the faded, the bloated, the blousy, the paunchy Adonis whose luck's turned lousy. Pity the gods, no longer divine. Pity the night, the stars lose their shine. I think it's a really true poem too, by the way. The New York Times put it in a blog paired with an article about Amy Winehouse. So I had all these people, writing in about, how I either had caught Amy or I had missed her charm, but it really isn't about Amy Winehouse, who deserves a different poem, I think. The second thing is that, I've done 2 opera libretti, and the first one, was based on F.W. Murnau's film Nosferatu, the first great vampire film. And, and it was interesting because what it allowed me to do is, in a sense, explore how you could make, in a sense, a romantic myth. And the one thing is that, the vampire myth was never really written with a significant opera. And so to be able to take that into a genre and explore that, sort of a 20th century, because it was still 20th century when I did it, although it was premiered in the 21st, take on that romantic myth. And this is the vampire's love song. If you know the movie in any of its versions, in this case, the vampire must have the woman come willingly to him. She must accept him as her lover. And so what the song needs to do is, in a sense, to provide whatever the plausible courtship, that he would have. And what would it be? And I'm struck in our society, and everybody in this room knows somebody the way that I'm going to describe, of people who are deliberately doing things which will kill them. All kinds of forms. I had a cousin who died 3 weeks ago of a drug overdose, black tar heroin, and these people, and so what is it that makes us embrace? What's the I think it's the line from Conrad, in the destructive element immerse. What is that thing? What is the thing that draws? And this is really what the opera is about. This is what the aria is about. Nosferatu's Serenade. I am the image that darkens your glass, the shadow that falls wherever you pass. I am the dream you cannot forget, the face you remember without having met. I am the truth that must not be spoken, the midnight vow that cannot be broken. I am the bell that tolls out the hours. I am the fire that warms and devours. I am the ache that you have denied, the pain of desire piercing your side. I am the sin you have never confessed, the forbidden hand caressing your breast. You've heard me inside you, speak in your dreams, sigh in the ocean, whisper in streams. I am the future you crave and you fear. You know what I bring. Now I am here. I also think that when you're writing for words, you've got to give words that a singer can inhabit. The singer has to, in a sense, learn things from these things that you wouldn't normally put in a poem. Now, I think I'm going to end with just a couple more love poems of a more generally wholesome nature. The first is I love the ballad form, which I think is one of it's the natural mode that we tell stories in the English language. But I've never written a ballad which is not immediately attacked by critics. In fact, they don't even wait till it comes out in a book. It bothers them so much, because I don't know why. I think part of it is a kind of elitist, sort of being abashed that you're adopting a form which is still quite alive in our popular culture. But it does seem to me if they hate it enough to attack it, I think that's a rather good thing, because it didn't leave them indifferent. And yet there are also the poems that that I think that seem to me have a kind of response. But I think it's a viable form. And this is a ballad which begins at a wedding called Summer Storm. We stood on the rented patio while the party went on inside. You knew the groom from college. I was a friend of the bride. We hugged the brownstone wall behind us to keep our dress clothes dry and watched the sudden summer storm floodlit against the sky. The rain was like a waterfall of brilliant beaded light, cool and silent as the stars the storm hid from the night. To my surprise, you took my arm, a gesture you didn't explain, and we spoke in whispers as if we too might imitate the rain. Then suddenly the storm receded as quickly as it came. The doors behind us opened up. The hostess called your name. I watched you merge into the crowd, aloof and yet polite. We didn't speak another word, except to say goodnight. Why does that evening's memory return with this night's storm? A party 20 years ago, its disappointments warm. There are so many might-have-beens, what-ifs that won't stay buried, other cities, other jobs, strangers we might have married, and memory insists on pining for places it never went, as if life might be happier just by being different. And then a very short poem. Years ago, I was asked to write a poem about New Year's Day by NPR. And I wrote a very elegant 36-line poem. And then after it was done and broadcast, I revised it down to 32 lines, and I revised it to 28, and a month later it was about 20 lines, and then it got to be about 18, and then it got down to about 16. And I thought it was going to be a sonnet, but it went right to 12 lines, and then down to 10. And finally, when it was 8 lines long, I realized it was very prolix and verbose, and I had to be cut. And so it finally ended up being 6 lines and had nothing whatsoever to do with New Year's. And that's not an atypical creative process for me. There's a poem hidden in the poem. And what this poem is about how much of the lives we lead are invisible to anyone but ourselves. Nobody really knows what's going on in our heads. We are in the cell of ourselves. It's called unsaid. So much of what we live goes on inside. The diaries of grief, the tongue-tied aches of unacknowledged love are no less real for having passed unsaid. What we conceal is always more than what we dare confide. Think of the letters that we write our dead. And then I want to end with a love poem. It'd be in my new book. It's a double sonnet. It takes its title from Shakespeare, who said, "The lunatic, the lover, and the poet are of imagination all compact." Which is to say that all 3 of them are crazy. And Shakespeare then goes on to point out that I think is it Theseus, I think, that says it in the play. But in their craziness, they see things that ordinary people miss. And so this is about 2 things. It's about how we lead our lives by the story we create from our lives, and the ability as our lives change, we have to change the stories. And that's, I think, a universal and necessary human impulse. And the failure to do this is really, I think that's what people, when they kill themselves, it's because they're in a story and they see no escape from the story, and the story is unbearable. Second thing is that love, especially married love, is a kind of endless conversation. It's where you wrap your story around someone else, and you can't imagine, in a sense, yourself without that person, and nothing is real until you share it. I think one of the ways you know you're absolutely in love is that you have to tell the other person about something. The lunatic is a double sonnet in 7, 7, 7, and 7, in a form I kind of improvised. The lunatic, the lover, and the poet. The tales we tell are either false or true, but neither purpose is the point. We weave the fabric of our own existence out of words, and the right story tells us who we are. Perhaps it is the words that summon us. The tale is often wiser than the teller. There is no naked truth but what we wear. So let me bring this story to our bed. The world, I say, depends upon a spell spoken each night by lovers unaware of their own sorcery. In innocence or agony, the same words must be spoken, or the restless moon will darken in the sky, the night grow still, the winds of dawn expire. And if I'm wrong, it cannot be by much. We know our own existence came from touch, the new soul summoned into life by lust, and love's shy tongue awakens in such fire, flesh on flesh and midnight whispering, as if the only purpose of desire were to explore its infinite unfolding. And so, my love, we are 2 lunatics, secretaries to the wordless moon, lying awake together or apart, transcribing every touch or aching absence into our endless, intimate palaver. Body to body, naked to the night, apparelled only in our utterance. Thank you so much.